Hello and welcome to number 6 in my series of videos where I ramble on for 10 or 20 minutes about the Harry Potter film series. If you've watched this far, both of you who have watched all of these videos, thanks very much. I really appreciate it. So being number 6, I have last night watched Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. So we're on the home stretch. We're getting there. There's only 2 more films to go. I watched it last night rather than last Monday. Last night, this is a Monday when I'm putting this up, so I watched it last Sunday night, which is like the last night I could watch it and still be on track to watch all of them by Christmas Eve. Watching the last one on Christmas Eve, I think. My general impressions, I actually really enjoyed this film. Generally speaking, I mean, there's some big differences between it and the book, but actually I found myself drawn into the world of this film a lot more than most of the other films in this series, apart from Prisoner of Azkaban and probably Philosopher's Stone. Even though Philosopher's Stone is possibly like the second weakest of all these films, I found myself still pretty drawn into its world. And it's the same with Half-Blood Prince. I found myself drawn into it. The look of the film is back to being a lot more magical and otherworldly rather than naturalistic, which I much prefer. There's a lot of soft focus going on. There's a lot more. There's a lot of filters being applied. A lot of colored filters. One of the big Dumbledore's office, like you can tell they've put like this golden yellow filter over, over the shots, and it really gives this really nice warm feel to the whole thing, which I really like. Some people might not, but that's just technical stuff that I actually really enjoyed. I thought the cinematography in this one was probably some of the best. The framing of a lot of shots, particularly ones of Draco. When Draco is alone in the carriage with before he stuns Harry, or before he freezes Harry, he's framed really well against the in between the window of the carriage as he pulls down the blind. There's also him lying in bed, and then using the room of requirement and stuff. There's a lot of actually quite thoughtful, I think, cinematography, which is better than I think a lot of the other films, which felt a little bit phoned in. They didn't really think about the kind of artistry of the shot. At least they gave it some thought in this one, which added to it, which I really appreciated. I actually like Draco, Tom Felton as Draco in this. He managed to convey the kind of depths of the character that you get to explore in this book, and then in the Deathly Hallows as well. That fact that he's trying to be the big bad Death Eater, but in reality he's good inside. He's underneath it all he's pretty moral, even though he's a bully and generally speaking a pretty terrible guy. He's not a killer. He's not truly evil. And Tom Felton really actually does a really good job of conveying that, which I actually really appreciated. Generally speaking, this film made me feel a lot more than the other films. And I mean, it is the film where a lot of emotional stuff happens. I mean, spoilers. I mean, is it really a spoiler alert? But I mean, I knew this even before I read the books, but Dumbledore's death actually was done in a way that made me feel something. It wasn't just me sort of sitting there going, oh, this is Dumbledore's death scene. I was kind of going, I actually feel this. And I said in my last video that I didn't think they'd done the groundwork for building up Snape. But in this film, they seem to pull it off. They seem to pull off the fact that, or Alan Rickman pulls off again the way Draco Malfoy is supposed to be, is, you know, trying to be evil but is actually good. Alan Rickman pulls off this sort of this somewhat conflicted, tortured character who actually, in the final estimation, is undyingly loyal and ultimately good inside, and he manages to convey that. He manages to convey that in a way that you know, you're not quite sure whether he's evil. Whereas in the books, you know, J.K. Rowling kind of kept me guessing, although I kind of knew that he would turn out good in the end. She does a good job of somehow keeping you guessing about that. Whereas Alan Rickman does a really good job of sort of telling the audience that he's not really evil, and that this was all planned. And actually, Michael Gambon's delivery of that final line, you know, please, is, you know, is such a tell to the audience, and I think he delivered it differently than it's read in the book. I think in the book, if I remember correctly, it's written that he's actually kind of pleading, and he's almost kind of hamming it up more. But in this one, he's much more calm and collected. Speaking of Michael Gambon, much better as Dumbledore, improved even over the last film. I believed him as Dumbledore much more. No more personality dysfunctions. There's a good bit of the whimsy there, where, you know, he asks for the magazine, the knitting magazine, from Professor Slughorn's house, but also the cool, calm, collectedness of the character. So yeah, I think it was pretty accomplished. We'll talk about Professor Slughorn in a minute, but the main three characters, with Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, and Rupert Grint. Rupert Grint does a really good job in the funny stuff. Not such a good performance with it when it comes to the dramatic stuff. I mean, these guys were what, 21 when they were doing this. They were playing 17-year-olds, I think, but because this film came out in 2009, so I think they were all 20 or 21. Rupert Grint kind of, he does a really good job of conveying the kind of humor in his relationship with Lowry Brown, and his kind of puffed up sense of importance, you know, at being the hero of I mean, in the book it's the actual Quidditch Cup, but in the films it's just a match, really, and he does a really good job of hamming that up, really well. Emma Watson does a really good job of making you feel really sorry for Hermione, and she genuinely made me feel a lot of a lot of compassion and a lot of empathy, for so she stepped it up a notch, and actually Daniel Radcliffe takes his performance up a little bit as well. I mean, he's still not there. I mean, to be fair, the acting from those three in these films is not super great, but it's, you know, it does the job. I think they've probably done their best work after Harry Potter. I haven't watched Deathly Hallows Part 1 and 2. Actually, I have seen, funnily enough, I have seen Deathly Hallows Part 2 before, sorta. I wasn't really paying attention. My mate's wife was watching it while we were playing PlayStation 4, so I kind of sort of half watched it before I read any of the books, so most of the stuff was spoiled for me before I read any of the books. Didn't stop my enjoyment of them anyway, but that's a tangent anyway. We'll see what it's like on a full viewing on just after Christmas Eve, actually. Let's talk about Slughorn. I don't think Broadbent was the right casting for this. he's a bit too, what's the word? He's he's a bit too clueless and a bit too all over the place for Slughorn. You know, he's a bit kind of um, hapless, which I I didn't really like that. For me, Slughorn was had it much more together in the books. He had it much more. He was much more slick and controlled, whereas Broadbent plays him as sort of skittish and a bit nervous, which isn't really how I imagine him. I didn't think it really worked for the character. I warmed to him as the film went on. When he first appears, I was like, no, I'm not buying this. I really don't buy this casting. But it works later on. It works better later on. So yeah, not as impressive. Definitely not as impressive as Imelda Staunton as Dolores Umbridge. Speaking of Umbridge, that reminds me of the whole setup of Fred and George's shop in Diagon Alley, which is, I think, just done to perfection. Honestly, I think it's fantastic the way they did that. Fred and George continue to get better with every film, as characters. There's no Fleur in any of these films. Is it Fleur and Charlie or Fleur and Bill who got together? People are gonna kill me for not remembering this, because I don't remember at all. I need to read the books again. But it is one omission that I thought they were gonna rectify in this film, but they didn't. Because it's supposed to be like awkward family Christmas because Molly doesn't really like Fleur at all and all that kind of stuff. So that was one change. It's one change that doesn't really suffer. The films don't really suffer for it, but still, it would be nice to see. One thing is the attack of the Death Eaters on the Weasley house doesn't happen in the book, but they added it in, and I can't quite tell why. Like, it doesn't really advance the plot very much. As far as I can tell, it doesn't. They just get their house burnt down. Like, why? I don't know why they had to add that in. Maybe just to up the stakes. Maybe they felt like the film was a bit too lighthearted and they needed to make it darker. More like the books. The film is actually more lighthearted than the previous film, but I mean, they're supposed to get darker as you get along. But this is quite a lighthearted film. Maybe, I mean, thinking back, actually, the book is more lighthearted than The Order of the Phoenix. When you read it, it is more lighthearted. With the whole Lavender Burn and Ron thing, and the sort of teen drama that goes on there, and the whole situation with Romilda Vane and the love potion chocolates. You know, that whole thing. I mean, that whole thing had me laughing out loud when I read it, and when I watched it I was laughing out loud again. I found it absolutely hilarious. It's one of the points where Rupert Grint really does sell his performance. He really buys into the humour of that whole situation. It's fantastic. Daniel Radcliffe, not so much in that scene. I don't think he's necessarily a comedic actor, but Rupert Grint does a really good job of selling that. Sorry. So yeah, the attack on the Weasley house just didn't seem to make much sense at all for me. But still, overall, this film is probably my favourite so far. I found myself drawn into the world of it. I found myself laughing. I found myself, emotionally engaged with the big moments. It's really well paced. The soundtrack is much nicer. It isn't just background music. It actually, there are themes. There's clearly a theme for Hermione, and when she's sitting on those steps, and you pick up on those things. It seems to be shot in a much more old school kind of way, with someone who has a bit more of a kind of Star Wars, Spielberg, Lord of the Rings sensibility, where soundtrack and cinematography and it seems like just, you know, somebody who understands how film works, basically, is what I'm trying to say. Like, soundtrack and the framing of a shot and the pacing and timing of everything, the editing of everything to come together to create an emotional moment. It seems like David Yates was the director. Yeah, he seems to get that in this film, more than some of the other directors got it in the other films. Certainly not Alfonso Cuarón, with his weird Renaissance music soundtrack that is just still makes me go, what even was that? That was John Williams, which just seems a bit weird. The score in this one sounds more like a John Williams score to me. It definitely works. The dialogue scenes don't seem rushed. They seem long enough to convey what you need to know without being overly wordy. So in that sense, it's really well paced. So yeah, I actually really enjoyed this film, and I wasn't expecting to, at all. And it follows the main beats of the story quite well. I mean, obviously those big changes are a bit weird. There's no Dursleys in this film again. Again, there's no house elves. Again, the ghosts just seem to have been gotten rid of completely, from the first two films. So yeah, it's bizarre. I mean, I don't know how you can invest enough in the character of Dobby in, like, what, 2 films he's in? 2 films? Yeah, he's in 2 of these films, and obviously spoilers again, but one of them he dies. So I mean, obviously if you've read the book, I mean, that was the one point in the book that made me cry. I mean, I do not cry at films, apart from Lord of the Rings when Sam's swimming out to the boat with Frodo. I cry every time, every time, cry every time. But that made me cry in the book. But again, a bit like Snape, they don't seem to have built up Dobby enough in the films. If you just watch the films, I mean, what incentive do you have to care so much about Dobby that he's only been in like 1 film? I think, is he in the other film? I can't remember. I think he's only in 1 film. Which is just a bit weird. And Creature, again, is hardly in these films. So yeah, I mean, those are general things about the films that I don't like. But this film, actually, I find myself thoroughly enjoying. So in terms of score, actually, again, I am scoring these in relation to each other, not in relation to other films. So in relation to each other, this is an 8. Yeah, it reaches that height, sort of 4 stars. For me. And actually the Metascore for this film in general is quite high. Is sort of, for a film, it's about 78, which is actually not bad for a film like this. And I think that's reflected in the fact that it seems like the most accomplished of the films, even though it again makes big changes to the story. So yeah, you can join me hopefully next Sunday. I am hoping to watch Deathly Hallows Part 1 tomorrow, rather than tonight. And yeah, hopefully on Sunday I will not be too tired from this week of work, to put out another one of these videos. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.